Have you ever heard a song so lonely it felt like it was searching for someone? The first time Evelyn Hart heard the wolf singing outside her cottage, she thought she was dreaming. The sound drifted through the pine trees just after midnight, soft and haunting beneath the glow of the full moon. It wasn't a howl. It wasn't a cry. It sounded almost like a melody, carried gently on the cold mountain air. Evelyn sat upright in her narrow bed, her heart beating faster as the unfamiliar notes floated through the darkness. For a moment, she stayed perfectly still, listening. Then the song came again. Low, melancholy, beautiful. Outside, snowflakes drifted across the forest clearing surrounding her small cottage. The nearest town sat nearly 12 miles away. Few travelers ever came this deep into Blackthorn Forest, especially during winter. Most people believed the woods were cursed. Evelyn never cared much about rumors. She had lived alone here for 3 years. The silence had become her companion. Slowly, she rose from bed and wrapped a thick wool shawl around her shoulders. The wooden floor creaked beneath her bare feet as she approached the window. Frost coated the glass. She wiped a small circle clear with her sleeve and looked outside. At first, she saw nothing except moonlight reflecting off fresh snow. Then movement caught her eye. Beneath the old cedar tree near her porch lay a wolf. Not an ordinary wolf. Even from inside, she could tell it was enormous. Its black fur seemed to absorb the moonlight itself. It rested peacefully beside the cottage, its head tilted toward the stars. And somehow, impossibly, the melody continued. Evelyn's breath caught. The wolf wasn't threatening. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't even watching the house. It simply lay there, singing into the night as though the forest itself were listening. She should have been afraid. Any sensible person would have been. Yet fear never came. Instead, she felt something else. A strange sadness she couldn't explain. The song felt familiar somehow, like a memory she couldn't quite reach. The wolf remained there until dawn painted the horizon pale blue. Then, just as quietly as it had arrived, it disappeared into the trees. Evelyn stepped outside moments later. Fresh snow covered the clearing. The only sign that the animal had ever been there was a line of massive paw prints leading back into the forest. She stared at them for a long time before returning inside. The next night, the wolf returned. And the night after that. Soon, the strange visits became part of her life. Every evening, shortly after midnight, the black wolf appeared beneath the cedar tree. Every evening, it sang. Sometimes Evelyn listened from the window. Sometimes she sat on the porch wrapped in blankets while snow drifted around them both. The wolf never approached, never growled, never demanded attention. Yet somehow, its presence filled the emptiness that had surrounded her for years. Then one night, as moonlight spilled across the clearing and the familiar melody drifted through the trees, the wolf lifted its head slightly and sang a different note. Evelyn froze. Her pulse skipped. Because hidden within the melody, clear as a whisper carried on the wind, she could have sworn she heard her own name. The snowstorm arrived 3 nights later. Evelyn woke shortly after midnight to the sound of wind rattling the cottage walls and branches scraping across the roof. The storm had rolled down from the northern mountains faster than expected, burying the forest beneath fresh layers of white. She pulled on her boots and added another log to the fireplace before glancing toward the window. The cedar tree was barely visible through the swirling snow. For the first time in weeks, she wondered if the wolf would come at all. No creature would willingly travel through weather like this. Yet as the clock crept past midnight, a familiar melody drifted through the storm. Faint at first, almost lost beneath the wind. Then stronger, clearer. The same lonely song she had heard night after night. Evelyn hurried to the window. Her breath fogged the glass as she searched the clearing. There, beneath the cedar tree, the massive black wolf had returned. Snow dusted its thick fur while the storm swirled around it. The sight stirred something warm inside her chest. Relief. She had not expected relief. Yet the thought of the clearing standing empty had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. The wolf lowered its head and continued singing softly into the darkness. Evelyn wrapped herself in her coat and stepped onto the porch. The cold bit immediately at her cheeks. Snowflakes brushed her hair and lashes. Usually she stayed near the door, but tonight she took a few cautious steps forward. The wolf noticed her. Its silver eyes lifted briefly toward her face. Neither moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the wolf simply returned to its song. Somehow, That trust felt like a gift. Evelyn smiled despite herself. "You are stubborn," she whispered into the wind. "Coming all the way out here in this weather." The wolf blinked slowly. A gust swept through the clearing. The melody faded. Evelyn shivered and retreated indoors. By morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight glittered across untouched snowfields. Evelyn stepped outside, carrying a bucket to gather fresh water from the nearby stream. As she crossed the clearing, something caught her eye near the base of the cedar tree. A dark bundle half buried beneath snow. Curious, she brushed away the frost. Her fingers froze. It was a blanket. Not an ordinary blanket. The fabric was thick, impossibly soft, and woven from dark charcoal wool finer than anything sold in nearby towns. Silver thread formed an intricate crest in one corner, a crown surrounded by moonlit branches. Evelyn stared at it. She had seen that symbol before. Once, years ago, hanging from banners during a royal procession passing through the capital. It belonged to the Alpha King. Her pulse quickened. Why would a royal blanket be lying outside her cottage? She looked toward the forest. The trees stood silent beneath the winter sun. Slowly, she gathered the blanket into her arms. It still carried a trace of warmth despite the cold morning. Evelyn swallowed hard. Somewhere beyond those woods, a mystery had just become far stranger than a singing wolf beneath a cedar tree. The blanket remained folded across the back of Evelyn's chair for 3 days before she finally touched it again. Not because she was afraid of it, but because every time she looked at the silver crest stitched into the fabric, a dozen impossible questions followed. Her cottage sat miles from the nearest village and even farther from the royal capital. Nothing connected her quiet life to the Alpha King's world. Yet somehow a royal blanket had appeared beneath her cedar tree. On the 4th morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window while she prepared tea. The blanket caught the light, revealing delicate patterns woven into the dark wool. Moon branches curled around a silver crown. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Evelyn traced one embroidered edge with her fingertips. The fabric felt impossibly warm. Not warm from the fireplace. Warm as if it remembered the person who had used it. She immediately pulled her hand away, embarrassed by the strange thought. Outside, winter continued settling over Blackthorn Forest. Snow covered the hills in every direction. The forest had always felt isolated, but lately it felt different. Alive somehow. Every evening, she found herself watching the fading sunlight and waiting for darkness to arrive. Waiting for a song. The realization unsettled her. She had spent years avoiding attachments. People left. Seasons changed. Promises faded. Solitude had always seemed simpler. Yet now the quiet hours before midnight felt longer than they used to. That night, the familiar melody returned. Evelyn stood on the porch wrapped in her coat, while silver moonlight washed over the clearing. The black wolf rested beneath the cedar tree once again. Snow sparkled across its dark fur. The song drifted through the cold air, carrying the same aching beauty she had come to recognize. This time, she brought the blanket with her. The moment she stepped onto the porch, the wolf lifted its head, its silver eyes fixed on the fabric in her arms. The melody stopped. Silence stretched between them. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Slowly, she held up one corner of the blanket. "Is this yours?" she asked softly. The wolf remained perfectly still. A breeze moved through the trees. Then something unexpected happened. The wolf lowered its gaze. Not in fear, not in submission. The gesture felt almost embarrassed. Evelyn blinked. "That is not an answer." The wolf turned its head away. For the first time since she had known it, she laughed. The sound surprised even her. It had been a long time since laughter came so easily. The wolf glanced back toward her. For an instant, she could have sworn curiosity flickered behind those silver eyes. They remained like that for several minutes. A woman standing on a snowy porch. A mysterious wolf beneath a cedar tree. Neither speaking, neither leaving. Yet somehow the silence felt comfortable. As midnight deepened, the melody slowly returned. Softer than before. Gentler. Evelyn settled into the porch swing and listened. She did not know that far beyond the mountains, in a palace of stone and silver banners, Alpha King Rowan Blackthorn would awaken the next morning in complete confusion. Nor did he know why traces of pine smoke clung to his clothes. He certainly did not know where his missing blanket had gone. But for the first time in many months, he would wake carrying a strange sense of peace he could not explain. 300 miles away, Rowan Blackthorn stood beside a palace window overlooking the snow-covered capital and tried to understand why he was holding a pine needle in his hand. He had found it tucked inside the sleeve of his coat that morning. Not one servant could explain how it got there. Not one guard could explain why the Alpha King kept waking in unfamiliar places. The mystery had followed him for months. Some mornings he awoke in palace gardens. Other times he found himself beside distant rivers or deep within royal forests. He never remembered leaving his chambers. He never remembered the journeys. Yet each morning brought strange clues. A feather, wildflowers, forest dirt on polished boots. The missing blanket bothered him most. It had vanished nearly a week ago. The blanket had belonged to his mother, one of the few possessions he had kept after her passing years earlier. Rowan rarely cared about material things, but that blanket carried memories he could not replace. Somewhere, somehow, it had disappeared. Across the room, his advisor Nathaniel Graves set another stack of reports on the desk. "You did not sleep again, Nathaniel." Observed carefully. Rowan rubbed tired eyes. "Apparently I did. That seems to be the problem." Nathaniel frowned. The council grows concerned. The council is always concerned. A faint smile touched Nathaniel's face before disappearing. "There are rumors." Rowan turned from the window. "There are always rumors. These are becoming specific." Nathaniel hesitated. "People have noticed that your mood improves after each incident." Rowan blinked. That part was true. Strange as it sounded, the unexplained episodes left him calmer than before. The crushing restlessness that had haunted him for years seemed lighter. The endless pressure of leadership felt more manageable. Sometimes he even woke carrying fragments of emotion he could not identify. Comfort, warmth, peace. As though somewhere during those missing hours he had found something his soul recognized. The feeling never lasted long. Yet every morning he found himself wanting it back. Later that afternoon, Rowan attended a gathering of regional leaders. Discussions filled the grand hall. Trade routes, winter supplies, border agreements. Normally, he handled such matters with ease. Today his attention drifted. Through towering windows, he watched snow fall beyond the city walls. Without warning, a melody surfaced in his thoughts. Soft, familiar. He froze. The tune lingered only seconds before fading away. Rowan frowned. He did not recognize the song, yet it stirred an ache of longing deep within his chest. Hundreds of miles away, Evelyn experienced something similar. That evening she sat near the fireplace mending an old coat while the royal blanket rested across her lap. Outside, darkness settled over Blackthorn Forest. She waited for the familiar song. Midnight came. The clearing remained empty. 1 o'clock passed. Still nothing. For the first time since the wolf had entered her life, it failed to appear. The silence felt wrong. Far too large. Evelyn told herself she should be relieved. Instead, she found herself glancing repeatedly toward the window. Waiting. Listening. Hoping. Then shortly before dawn, a gentle knock sounded against her front door. Not loud. Not urgent. Just 3 soft taps that seemed almost uncertain. Evelyn slowly rose from her chair. No visitors ever came this deep into the forest. Her pulse quickened as she crossed the room. Beyond the door, someone stood waiting in the falling snow. For several seconds, Evelyn simply stared at the door. The knock had been gentle, almost hesitant, as though whoever stood outside was uncertain they should be there at all. Snow whispered against the windows while the fire crackled softly behind her. Another knock followed. 3 quiet taps. She tightened her grip on the lantern and moved closer. "Who is it?" she called. Silence answered. Not complete silence. She could hear the wind, the distant creak of tree branches. But no voice came from the other side. Evelyn hesitated before slowly unlocking the door. The moment it opened, cold air swept into the cottage. Standing on the porch was a man she had never seen before. He looked to be in his early 30s. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat dusted with snow. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his silver eyes reflected the lantern light in a way that instantly felt familiar. Yet what struck Evelyn most was his expression. He looked completely confused. The stranger glanced past her shoulder toward the warm glow inside the cottage. Then he looked down at himself as though he was not entirely sure how he had arrived there. "I apologize," he said quietly. His voice was deep and calm. "I believe I may be lost." Evelyn blinked. Something about him felt strangely familiar. Not his face, not his voice, Something deeper than that. Before she could respond, his gaze shifted toward the blanket folded across the nearby chair. The royal blanket. The moment he saw it, his expression changed. Not recognition exactly. More like the feeling of seeing something important in a dream. That blanket, he said softly. Where did you get it? Evelyn's pulse quickened. I found it outside. The stranger frowned slightly. Outside, near the cedar tree. His eyes lingered on the blanket for several seconds before he shook his head. That does not make any sense. Evelyn almost laughed. You are not the only one who thinks that. For a moment neither spoke. Snow continued drifting down around the porch. Finally, Evelyn stepped aside. You look frozen. Come inside. The man hesitated. Then he nodded. The warmth of the cottage seemed to relax him immediately. He stood near the fireplace while Evelyn prepared tea. Something about the scene felt oddly natural, as though this was not the first time he had stood in this room. The thought made no sense, yet she could not shake it. I am Evelyn, she said. Rowan. The cup nearly slipped from her hand. Rowan. Her mind immediately flashed to silver crowns stitched into dark wool and banners she remembered from years ago. It was a common enough name, yet hearing it now sent a ripple of unease through her chest. The stranger accepted the tea and offered a grateful smile. Outside, dawn slowly approached. Pale light touched the edges of the forest. Rowan glanced toward the window. I should leave before sunrise. Do you know where you are going? Evelyn asked. He looked genuinely uncertain. Not exactly. She studied him carefully. Then another realization struck her. During all the weeks the wolf had visited, it had always disappeared before dawn. Tonight the wolf never came. Instead, a silver-eyed stranger named Rowan had appeared at her door, carrying the same strange sense of familiarity. As he prepared to leave, Evelyn noticed something else. Near the hem of his coat, caught in a fold of dark fabric, was a single black strand of fur. After Rowan disappeared into the snowfall, Evelyn stood in the doorway long after sunrise. Cold air drifted through the opening, but she barely noticed. Her attention remained fixed on the single strand of black fur she had found clinging to his coat. It rested in her palm like a question she could no longer ignore. The silver eyes, the strange familiarity, the missing wolf. None of it felt like coincidence anymore. For the next several days, Rowan did not return. Neither did the wolf. The silence unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Every night, she found herself sitting beside the window with a cup of tea, watching moonlight settle across the clearing. The cedar tree stood alone beneath the stars. No melody drifted through the forest. No silver eyes appeared beyond the snow. The absence felt strangely personal. On the fourth night, a storm rolled across the mountains. Wind rattled the shutters while clouds swallowed the moon. Evelyn could not sleep. Near midnight, she wrapped herself in a coat and stepped outside. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she crossed the clearing toward the cedar tree. The forest seemed endless beneath the darkness. She glanced upward through the branches. Where did you go? She whispered, feeling foolish the moment the words left her mouth. The wind carried them away. Then something moved, not far beyond the tree line. A shadow slipped between snow-covered pines. Evelyn froze. Her pulse quickened. The shape emerged slowly into the clearing. Relief flooded her chest before she could stop it. The black wolf had returned. Snow clung to its fur, while moonlight finally broke through the clouds overhead. For several moments neither moved. Then the wolf began walking toward her. Closer than ever before. 10 feet. 8 feet. 6. Evelyn remained perfectly still. She should have stepped back. Instead, she found herself waiting. The wolf stopped a few feet away. Close enough for her to see every detail of its silver eyes. Close enough to recognize the same gaze she had seen across her kitchen table. Her breath caught. The realization arrived all at once. Not as a suspicion, not as a theory, as certainty. Those eyes belonged to Rowan. The moment the thought formed, the wolf suddenly looked away as if embarrassed by being recognized. Evelyn almost laughed despite her racing heart. It is you, she whispered. The wolf lowered its head. A gust of wind swept across the clearing. Snow spiraled around them both. Then something extraordinary happened. Moonlight brightened. The air itself seemed to shimmer. Evelyn watched in stunned silence as the dark shape before her shifted beneath the silver glow. Not frightening. Not violent. More like watching a reflection change upon still water. The outline gradually transformed until a man stood where the wolf had been moments earlier. Rowan blinked as though waking from a dream. His expression carried the same confusion she remembered from the morning he arrived at her door. He looked around the clearing. Then his gaze landed on her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Snow drifted softly between them. Finally, Rowan looked down at his hands, then back toward Evelyn. "I think," he said quietly, "you may know something about me that I do not." Rowan's question lingered between them while snow drifted through the moonlit clearing. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, uncertain where to begin. How could she possibly explain weeks of midnight songs, a missing royal blanket, and a wolf that seemed to know her better than he knew himself? Rowan waited patiently. There was no fear in his expression, no anger, only quiet curiosity. Finally, Evelyn exhaled. "You have been coming here for months." Rowan blinked. "I have." She nodded. "Not exactly like this." A faint smile touched her lips despite the absurdity of the situation. "Usually you arrive with 4 paws." Rowan stared at her. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he glanced toward the cedar tree, as if expecting answers to be hanging from its branches. That would explain a few things. Evelyn folded her arms against the cold. "Such as the pine needles." He looked genuinely thoughtful. "The dirt on my boots. The missing hours." His gaze lifted toward her. "And apparently the missing blanket." Evelyn could not help smiling. "Yes, that too." Rowan shook his head slowly, almost laughing at himself. "The council has spent months searching for an explanation. Scholars, healers, advisors. None of them suggested I might be wandering into forests and singing outside cottages." The words settled into silence. Then Evelyn's smile faded slightly. "You really do not remember?" Rowan's expression softened. "Nothing." The answer carried an honesty that was impossible to doubt. Evelyn studied him carefully. Somehow that made everything feel even stranger. Every night his wolf had found its way to her door without fail. Yet the man standing before her had no memory of any of it. As they spoke, clouds drifted away from the moon. Silver light spilled across the clearing. Rowan's gaze suddenly settled on her face. His expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Evelyn to notice. He looked surprised, almost puzzled. "What?" she asked. Rowan hesitated. "This may sound strange." Evelyn laughed quietly. "I think we moved past strange a while ago." A corner of his mouth lifted. "Fair point." He looked toward the stars before continuing. "I feel like I know you." The confession caught her off guard because she felt exactly the same way. Not the certainty of recognizing a stranger. Something older. Familiarity without memory. Comfort without explanation. Neither spoke for several moments. The forest seemed unusually quiet around them. Then Rowan looked back toward the cottage. "May I ask you something?" Evelyn nodded. "When I came here before, when my wolf came here, was I happy?" The question surprised her more than anything else that night. She thought about the songs beneath the cedar tree, the peaceful way the wolf rested beneath the stars, the calm she always sensed whenever it arrived. Her answer came easily. Yes. Rowan absorbed that quietly. Something vulnerable flickered in his silver eyes. "That is good to know." Far away, inside the royal capital, Nathaniel Graves stood in Rowan's empty chambers watching dawn approach. The Alpha King had vanished again. But this time something was different. Resting on Rowan's desk was an old journal that had remained unopened for years. It now lay open to a page written in Rowan's mother's handwriting. Across the yellowed paper, one sentence stood alone. "Sometimes the heart finds its way home long before the mind understands the journey." The next morning arrived wrapped in silver fog. Evelyn woke to find Rowan sitting on the cottage porch with a cup of tea cooling between his hands. He looked as though he had not moved for hours. Snow rested on the railing beside him while the forest stretched endlessly beyond the clearing. For a moment, she simply watched him through the window. There was something different about him now. Not because she knew his secret, because he knew it too. When she stepped outside, Rowan looked up and offered a quiet smile. "I was beginning to think I imagined everything." Evelyn sat beside him. "The wolf." Rowan nodded. "The songs. The forest. You." His gaze drifted toward the cedar tree. "But then I remembered something." That caught her attention immediately. "You remembered?" "Only fragments." Rowan stared into the distance. "A feeling. Moonlight through branches. A voice." He hesitated. "Your voice." Evelyn felt her heart skip. Rowan exhaled slowly. "For months I thought something was wrong with me. Every morning I woke with pieces missing. Now I realized something was trying to guide me. Later that afternoon, they rode into the nearest village together. Rowan wore a simple coat and kept his identity hidden, but his presence still drew attention. Not because people recognized him, because confidence seemed woven into every movement. While Evelyn gathered supplies, Rowan wandered through a small bookstore near the town square. An elderly woman stood behind the counter. The moment she saw him, her expression changed. "Your mother had eyes just like yours," she said quietly. Rowan froze. "You knew my mother?" The woman nodded. "Many years ago." She disappeared into a back room and returned carrying a thin leather journal. "She left this here during her travels. Said someone important would eventually come looking for it." Rowan carefully opened the journal. Inside were pages filled with observations, sketches, and personal notes. Most meant little to him. Then he found a passage near the end. His breath caught. "There are rare bonds older than tradition," his mother had written. "Sometimes a wolf recognizes its true home before the human heart understands why. When that happens, the soul begins the journey first." Rowan read the words several times. Something settled inside him. That evening, back at the cottage, he showed the journal to Evelyn. Together they sat beside the fireplace while snow drifted beyond the windows. Page after page revealed stories of ancient connections that defied explanation. One passage described sleep wandering among powerful wolves whose instincts sensed something important long before their conscious minds accepted it. Another described songs appearing without reason, carrying emotions too deep for ordinary language. Evelyn looked up from the journal. "You think that is what happened?" Rowan smiled softly. "I think my wolf solved a mystery long before I did." Silence settled comfortably between them. Outside, night slowly embraced the forest. For the first time in months, Rowan felt no pull dragging him toward an unknown destination. No restless uncertainty. No missing pieces. Because the journey was no longer unfinished. And as moonlight touched the cedar tree beyond the window, both of them failed to notice the final sentence written at the bottom of the last page. "The bond is complete when the heart arrives where the soul has already been waiting." Winter slowly loosened its grip on Blackthorn Forest. Snow melted from the hillsides, streams flowed freely again, and the cedar tree outside Evelyn's cottage stood surrounded by fresh green grass. For the first time in months, the nights were quiet. No mysterious journeys. No missing memories. No unanswered questions. Rowan remained exactly where he chose to be. And more often than not, that place was beside Evelyn. The royal capital had nearly fallen into chaos when word spread that the Alpha King had vanished for several days. Advisors searched. Messengers traveled. Rumors multiplied. Yet when Rowan finally returned, he did not arrive alone. He brought Evelyn with him. The journey to the capital felt unreal. Towering silver gates welcomed them. Banners fluttered above stone walls. Crowds filled the streets. Evelyn had spent years hidden from the world, and now hundreds of people turned to watch as she entered the city beside the kingdom's ruler. She expected whispers, questions, doubt. Instead, she found something else. Respect. Nathaniel Graves greeted her with a smile that suggested he already knew far more than he admitted. "I have never seen him this happy," he quietly confessed while Rowan spoke with members of the council. Evelyn glanced across the hall. Rowan was smiling. Not the polite expression expected from a king. A genuine smile. Warm. Easy. Real. She realized Nathaniel was right. Several days later, Rowan asked her to accompany him somewhere. He refused to explain where they were going. Their horses followed a winding trail through forests and hills until familiar trees appeared ahead. Evelyn immediately recognized the clearing. Her cottage stood exactly where she had left it. The cedar tree swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. "Why are we here?" she asked. Rowan dismounted and walked toward the porch. For a moment, he simply looked at the cottage. Then he laughed softly. "Because this is where my life started making sense." Evelyn's heart tightened. Rowan stepped onto the porch and disappeared inside. When he returned, he carried something folded across his arms. The blanket. The same royal blanket that had begun the entire mystery. He walked toward her and carefully placed it in her hands. "I think this belongs here now." Evelyn looked down at the silver crown embroidered into the fabric. Then she looked back at him. Rowan's silver eyes reflected the afternoon sunlight. "Every road I traveled led here," he said quietly, even when I did not understand why. Emotion caught in her throat. For a moment, neither moved. The forest around them seemed to grow still. Then Rowan did something that made her smile. He glanced toward the cedar tree and shook his head. You know, I still do not remember half those songs. Evelyn laughed. I remember them. Rowan's expression softened. Then perhaps you can help me learn them. As evening settled across the clearing, they sat together on the porch watching the sun disappear beyond the mountains. No mysteries remained. No hidden journeys waited in the darkness. Yet when the first stars appeared overhead, Rowan quietly began humming a familiar melody. The same melody that had once drifted through moonlit forests. The same melody that had carried him home before he even knew what he was searching for. And this time, for the very first time, he sang it fully awake.